The message did not begin as a threat. It arrived as a statement, cold, measured, and repeated across every major channel in the known galaxy. Humans are afraid of war. The declaration came from the Galactic Council itself, transmitted in flawless clarity, translated into thousands of languages, and carried on every relay network from the core systems to the outermost colonies. It wasn't debated. It wasn't questioned. It was accepted as fact. Across distant worlds, reactions followed a predictable pattern. Some civilizations dismissed humanity with quiet amusement, noting their tendency to negotiate rather than retaliate. Others saw opportunity. A species that avoided conflict, that chose diplomacy even under pressure, was not a threat. It was a resource waiting to be leveraged. Records supported the claim. Humans had been present in interstellar affairs for decades, yet their military footprint was strangely absent. They built trade routes, not war corridors. They deployed hospital fleets larger than most species' armadas. Their ships arrived first at disaster zones and last to battlefields, if they arrived at all. Even when provoked, they held back. There were incidents, border violations, piracy against human cargo lanes, even isolated attacks on human outposts. In each case, humanity responded the same way. They issued warnings. They reinforced defenses. They evacuated civilians with impossible speed. But they did not escalate. They did not pursue. They did not retaliate beyond what was necessary to contain damage. To many, it confirmed the Council's conclusion. Humans feared war because they valued life too much to risk it. Inside the Council chambers, the reasoning was more calculated. Species that survived long enough to reach the stars understood one principle: power reveals itself under pressure. Humanity had been tested, repeatedly, and had never once chosen expansion through force. Their restraint was not interpreted as discipline. It was labeled as hesitation. They avoid conflict, one counselor stated during the closed session. Not because they cannot fight, but because they will not. Or because they cannot afford to. Another replied. The distinction mattered. If humans were unwilling, they were predictable. If they were unable, they were vulnerable. Data streams were presented. Human fleets were vast, but structured strangely. Large portions were dedicated to evacuation logistics, medical support, and defensive shielding technologies. Their weapons, while advanced, were rarely deployed. Entire segments of their fleet compositions lacked offensive configurations entirely. It didn't align with any known war doctrine. More curious still were the restricted zones. Regions of human-controlled space marked by absolute exclusion, where even Council probes were denied entry. Requests for access were met with polite refusals, always consistent, always final. No explanation was ever provided. Archived records from early human expansion were incomplete. Large portions had been sealed under classification levels even the Council could not override. Attempts to reconstruct their early conflicts resulted in fragmented data, references to events without context, outcomes without details. It was as if entire chapters of human history had been deliberately erased. That anomaly was noted, but not prioritized. What mattered was observable behavior. And observable behavior showed restraint, avoidance, and an unwillingness to engage in sustained conflict. In a galaxy where survival often depended on decisive aggression, humanity appeared passive. The conclusion spread quickly beyond the Council. Independent factions began reassessing human territories, recalculating risk. Trade partners grew more assertive in negotiations. Bordering systems increased minor incursions, testing responses. Each time, humanity reacted the same way. Warnings. Containment. No escalation. No war. The pattern reinforced itself until it became doctrine. Humans would not fight unless absolutely cornered, and perhaps not even then. Eventually, that belief reached those willing to act on it. Beyond the Council's direct influence, a coalition of opportunistic powers began aligning their interests. Not openly, not yet, but with growing confidence. A species that refused to project force created a vacuum. And vacuums were meant to be filled. Initial plans were cautious. Probe responses. Limited incursions. Controlled engagements designed to measure thresholds. If humans resisted, they would withdraw. If not, they would advance. All projections indicated minimal risk. Within the Council, the proposal to formally test humanity was not met with resistance. It was framed as verification, a necessary step to confirm what was already accepted as truth. If humans were indeed afraid of war, the outcome would be predictable. If they were not, the Council would adapt. Either way, uncertainty would be eliminated. The vote passed without delay. Authorization was granted for a controlled incursion into human space. No one considered it a declaration of war. Because, according to everything they believed, humans would never allow it to become one. The incursion began without resistance, exactly as predicted. A coalition fleet crossed into the outer edge of human-controlled space under full observation, their ships broadcasting identification codes that were deliberately incomplete. It was not an accident. It was a test, subtle, deniable, and calculated. If humans responded, it would remain a misunderstanding. If they did not, the boundary would be proven meaningless. They responded. Not with weapons, but with a signal, precise, immediate, and impossible to ignore. You are entering restricted space. Adjust course or state intent. The transmission carried no hostility. No threat. It was calm, almost procedural, as if issued by an automated system rather than a living command. The coalition fleet paused only long enough to confirm reception, then continued forward. A second message followed, identical in tone, but firmer in structure. Coordinates were provided. A clear exit vector. A deadline measured down to the second. The fleet did not comply. Instead, they advanced deeper, deploying reconnaissance drones and mapping local infrastructure. Human presence was confirmed, stations, relays, and patrol routes, but no offensive mobilization. No warships moved to intercept. No weapons locked on target. It was exactly what they expected. A third transmission arrived, this time from a human vessel positioned well outside direct engagement range. The voice was unmistakably human, controlled, steady, and unhurried. You are approaching a protected zone. This is your final warning. Turn back. There was no escalation in tone. No urgency. Just certainty. The coalition commanders interpreted it as hesitation. Orders were issued. The fleet split formation, sending a smaller strike group toward a peripheral outpost, isolated, lightly defended, and strategically insignificant. A perfect target. If humanity reacted, the coalition would withdraw. If not, the outcome would confirm everything. The attack lasted less than 3 minutes. Human defenses activated instantly, intercepting initial fire with precise efficiency. Shields absorbed impact far beyond what the outpost size should have supported. Automated systems responded faster than any crew could have managed, redirecting power, sealing breaches, and maintaining structural integrity under sustained assault. Then, without warning, the outpost went silent. No distress calls. No retaliation. No final transmission. For a moment, the coalition believed it had been destroyed. Then scans updated. The station was gone, not destroyed, but evacuated. Every life sign had vanished within seconds of the first strike. Escape vectors traced dozens of small craft dispersing in coordinated patterns, already beyond effective targeting range. The outpost itself remained intact, systems powered down, abandoned with deliberate precision. The attackers regrouped, uncertain. No counterattack followed. No pursuit. Only silence. Data was transmitted back to the Council. The report was clear. Humans had been tested, and they had withdrawn. Even under direct assault, they chose preservation over retaliation. The conclusion reinforced itself. They will not fight. Across the coalition fleet, confidence solidified into certainty. The boundary had been crossed, and nothing had happened. The next phase began without hesitation. Additional targets were selected: logistical nodes, communication relays, minor installations. Each strike followed the same pattern. Swift engagement. Immediate human evacuation. Zero escalation. It was not resistance. It was avoidance. Celebration spread through command channels. Victory, though unofficial, felt inevitable. The coalition had proven what the Council had declared. Humanity, for all its resources and reach, refused to engage in war. But beneath that conclusion, something went unnoticed. Every movement of the fleet was being tracked. Every weapon discharge recorded. Every tactical decision observed in real time. Human systems, silent and unseen, were cataloging everything with exacting detail. Patterns were forming. Thresholds were being measured. And then, without warning, the pattern broke. A single transmission was broadcast across all coalition frequencies, overriding encryption protocols as if they did not exist. It came not from a ship, nor a station, but from everywhere at once. The voice was the same as before. Calm. Controlled. Unchanged. You have crossed the threshold. No further explanation followed. No threat. No demand. Just a statement. Moments later, long-range sensors began registering anomalies. Not within the system, but beyond it. Deep space distortions, brief, precise, and repeating across multiple vectors. At first, they were dismissed as sensor errors. Then they synchronized. Multiple signals converging. Something was moving. Not from within human territory, but from places the coalition had not even considered. Regions thought empty. Coordinates marked as irrelevant. Distances too vast for rapid deployment. And yet, they were closing. Fast. For the first time since the incursion began, uncertainty replaced confidence. Because humanity had not responded like a species afraid of war. They had responded like a species that had been waiting. The first internal record was never meant to be heard by anyone outside humanity. It was not a speech, nor a warning, but a preserved fragment, an operational log sealed behind layers of authorization. When it surfaced, it did not explain what humans were about to do. It explained why they had waited so long not to. Humanity does not fear war. Humanity fears the absence of limits. The statement repeated across archived doctrine, embedded into command protocols, reinforced through generations of training. It was not philosophy. It was restraint, written into law after lessons that had nearly erased them. Long before they reached the stars, humans had already mastered destruction. Their early conflicts had not been small, not contained, and not forgotten, only buried. Entire regions of their homeworld had been rendered uninhabitable. Weapons had been created faster than ethics could restrain them, and by the time those ethics formed, it was already too late to undo what had been done. They had learned something no other species had documented so completely: escalation does not stop on its own. It accelerates. Each victory demanded a greater one. Each loss justified a harsher response. Lines were drawn, then erased, then redrawn further back until there were no lines left at all. War did not end when one side surrendered. It ended when there was nothing left worth fighting over. That was the point at which humanity changed. They did not abandon war because they were weak. They abandoned it because they understood its final form. Every advancement they made afterward, every diplomatic effort, every evacuation protocol, every defensive system, was designed around a single objective: never allow themselves to reach that point again. Restraint became their greatest weapon. It governed their expansion, their alliances, even their silence under provocation. They absorbed losses that other species would have avenged instantly. They chose containment over retaliation, preservation over dominance. To outsiders, it looked like hesitation. It was not. It was control. Hidden beneath that control were systems no one else had seen. Fleets stationed in regions intentionally left uncharted. Weapons locked behind layers of authorization that required consensus, not command. Entire doctrines that existed only as contingencies, never to be used unless every alternative had failed. Among them was one directive that overrode all others. Total War Protocol. It was not a plan. It was a threshold. Activation required conditions that humanity had sworn would never be met. verified civilian targeting, repeated aggression after warning, confirmed intent to continue escalation. Each requirement existed to delay the inevitable, to create opportunities for de-escalation even when logic argued against it. Because once activated, the protocol did not allow for partial measures. War would not be fought to repel. It would be fought to end. The coalition had unknowingly met every condition. The attack on the outpost had not triggered retaliation because it had not yet crossed the final line. It had been observed, recorded, and analyzed. The subsequent strikes had confirmed the pattern. This was not a misunderstanding. It was not an isolated incident. It was intent. And so the final authorization was granted. There was no celebration. No rallying cry. No emotional response. The systems that activated did so without hesitation, executing commands that had existed long before the current generation had been born. Across human-controlled space, dormant networks came online. Fleets that had never appeared in any registry began moving in perfect synchronization. Command structures shifted from decentralized diplomacy to unified execution, guided by algorithms refined over centuries. The change was not visible in words or declarations. It was visible in silence. Communications narrowed. Non-essential channels went dark. Civilian routes were cleared with precision that bordered on impossibility, as if every movement had been anticipated long in advance. Because it had. Humanity had not prepared for this specific war. They had prepared for the inevitability of one. And when the threshold was crossed, hesitation was removed entirely. The fear that had defined their restraint did not disappear. It was acknowledged, contained, and set aside. Not ignored, never ignored, but overridden by something far more absolute. Completion. The final record within the log did not describe what would happen next. It did not need to. Engagement authorized. No escalation beyond this point will be permitted to persist. For humanity, that was not a threat. It was a promise. The first human fleet did not arrive from a single direction. It appeared from everywhere the coalition had not been watching. Deep space distortion stabilized into precise formations, each emergence calculated to intersect escape vectors, reinforcement routes, and command positions simultaneously. There was no buildup, no warning beyond what had already been given. One moment the coalition controlled the field. The next, it was surrounded by forces that had not existed on any prior scan. Every human vessel moved with identical timing, as if guided by a single intelligence rather than separate crews. Formation shifts occurred before orders could be issued. Targeting solutions adjusted faster than reaction cycles allowed. The coalition's command structure, built on layered decision-making, found itself outpaced before it could even respond. Then the attacks began. Not with overwhelming fire, but with precision so exact it felt surgical. Key systems were disabled in sequence: propulsion arrays, communication relays, targeting interfaces, each strike removing capability without destroying the vessel itself. Ships remained intact, but functionally inert, drifting in controlled silence. Return fire was immediate, but ineffective. Human ships did not evade in traditional patterns. They repositioned through brief spatial distortions, appearing just beyond predicted trajectories, always one calculation ahead. Shields adapted in real time, redistributing energy to absorb impacts that should have penetrated. It was not a battle of strength. It was a demonstration of control. Coalition commanders attempted to regroup, issuing orders for concentrated strikes against identified human flagships. The effort failed before it began. There were no identifiable command vessels. No hierarchy visible in the formation. Every unit operated with full awareness, executing strategies that adjusted faster than centralized control could manage. Attempts to retreat were cut off instantly. Exit vectors collapsed under coordinated interference, navigation systems disrupted with pinpoint accuracy. Not jammed, not destroyed, altered just enough to render escape impossible without causing catastrophic miscalculations. Panic spread through channels that had, moments earlier, carried confidence. Reports flooded in. Entire squadrons disabled within seconds of engagement. Weapons rendered inert mid-discharge. Defensive systems overridden by mechanisms that did not match any known technology. The coalition had prepared for resistance, not for this level of absolute dominance. And still, the human fleets did not escalate beyond necessity. They did not pursue fleeing ships beyond containment zones. They did not fire on disabled vessels. They did not inflict damage beyond what was required to remove the threat. Every action was measured, deliberate, and final in its intent. War, as the coalition understood it, did not behave this way. There was no chaos. No unpredictability. No desperation. Only inevitability. A final attempt was made to regain control. A coordinated strike from multiple fleets, converging on a single human formation with maximum output, designed to overwhelm even adaptive defenses through sheer volume. The attack executed flawlessly. It failed completely. Before impact, the targeted formation shifted, space itself bending around them in controlled distortions that redirected the incoming barrage into empty vectors. The energy dispersed harmlessly, while countermeasures disabled the attacking fleets in the same instant. The realization followed immediately. Humans were not reacting to the battle. They had already solved it. Every move the coalition made had been anticipated, modeled, and countered before it occurred. The engagement was not dynamic. It was predetermined, unfolding along paths that had been calculated long before the first shot was fired. Resistance collapsed. Not through destruction, but through the removal of all options. One by one, coalition vessels lost functionality until entire fleets drifted in silence, intact but powerless. Command channels fell quiet, not from damage, but from the understanding that there was nothing left to command. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the human offensive stopped. No final strike. No pursuit of total annihilation. The fleets held position, maintaining control without advancing further. It was the most unsettling part of all. Because it proved the outcome had never required escalation. The coalition had expected war to be a contest of endurance, of force against force until one side broke. Instead, they had been shown something else entirely. War, in human hands, was not prolonged. It was concluded. Silence spread faster than any signal. Across the systems that had once echoed with confident transmissions, there was now only controlled stillness. Coalition fleets drifted in stable formation, their hulls unbroken, their crews alive, yet their ships unresponsive to command. No fires burned. No debris fields marked the aftermath. It did not look like defeat. It looked like something far more deliberate. Containment. Emergency channels reopened gradually, not by coalition effort, but by external authorization. Systems came back online in restricted layers, just enough for communication, not enough for resistance. Every restored function felt permitted, not regained. Then the message arrived. It did not override networks this time. It did not force itself into every channel. It appeared where it was allowed to be received, as if the same precision that had disabled entire fleets now governed the return of their voices. The signal carried no distortion, no emotional inflection, no trace of urgency. "We have concluded active engagement." There was a pause, not in transmission, but in comprehension. No one had expected the war to end so quickly. No one had expected it to end without destruction. "You were warned. You were given opportunity to withdraw. You chose continuation." Each statement aligned with recorded events, undeniable in its accuracy. There was no accusation in the tone, only acknowledgement. "We do not fear war." The words carry no emphasis, yet they cut through every assumption that had led to this moment. "We fear the absence of limits within it." Data followed, not as justification, but as evidence. Tactical records, engagement timelines, system logs, all shared without restriction. The coalition could see exactly how they had been defeated, how each decision had been anticipated, how every outcome had been controlled. Nothing had been left to chance. "We ended this engagement at the earliest possible point of total control." The implication settled slowly, heavier than any threat. This had not been the maximum extent of human capability. It had been the minimum required. Across the council chambers, no one spoke. The doctrine that had once defined humanity, passive, hesitant, avoidant, collapsed under the weight of observable truth. They had not witnessed weakness. They had witnessed restraint so absolute it had been mistaken for inability. And they had forced it to break. We will not advance further. The statement was final, not conditional. You will retain your vessels. You will retain your territories. You will retain your autonomy. A measured restoration began immediately. Propulsion systems reactivated under limited parameters. Navigation returned in controlled intervals. Weapons remained offline, inaccessible, as if the concept itself had been temporarily removed. It was not mercy. It was enforcement of an ending. You will also retain this knowledge. No elaboration followed, because none was needed. The galaxy had been given a complete understanding of what humanity was capable of when restraint was no longer an option. Not through destruction, but through demonstration. And that knowledge would not fade. We will resume prior diplomatic status. The simplicity of the statement was almost incomprehensible. There was no demand for reparations. No territorial claims. No imposed governance. Humanity stepped back from the edge they had reached, as if returning to a position they had never left. Because, in their own perspective, they hadn't. War had been an interruption, not a transformation. The final line carried the same calm certainty as the first transmission that had warned the coalition to turn back. This outcome was chosen. Not inevitable. Not accidental. Chosen. The signal ended without ceremony. In the aftermath, the galaxy did not celebrate survival. It recalculated its understanding of power. Fear, once directed at what humans might do in conflict, shifted toward what they chose not to do. Because the restraint that had defined them was no longer seen as weakness. It was seen as the only barrier preventing something far worse. Trade resumed cautiously. Communications reopened with a precision that bordered on reverence. Borders were respected without question, not because they were enforced, but because no one wished to test what lay beyond them again. Human vessels returned to their familiar roles, carriers of aid, architects of infrastructure, silent guardians of stability. Nothing in their outward behavior had changed. And yet everything had. The declaration that had once spread across the galaxy still existed in archives, unchanged in wording, but altered in meaning. Humans are afraid of war. Now it was understood correctly. Not as a flaw, but as a warning.